When the world talks about AI chips, two names stand out: NVIDIA's Jensen Huang and AMD's Lisa Su. What many people don't know about that part of their story is that their story begins in Taiwan through a powerful business network known as the Tainan Gang, which helped shape modern Taiwan's economy. Three key takeaways from today's episode. The roots of AI icons Jensen Huang and Lisa Su trace back to Taiwan's influential Tainan Gang. Universal Cement exited China before the emergence of the China Plus One strategy, showing remarkable foresight. And AI is driving a traditional cement company's next transformation. When people talk about the AI revolution, they usually think of Silicon Valley. But the story of some of the industry's leaders actually got their start thousands of miles away in Tainan, Taiwan. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang and AMD CEO Lisa Su are among the biggest names in AI. Both were born in Taiwan, both went on to lead global semiconductor giants, and perhaps surprisingly, they're related. There's also another connection to our guest today, Jack Hou, president of Universal Cement. Although they work in very different industries, Huang, Su, and Hou all have their roots in Tainan. For centuries, Tainan has been a center of trade and entrepreneurship. By the early 1900s, the ancestors of Huang, Su, and Hou had already become well-known business families in Tainan. The Sus were involved in paper, the Hous in textiles, and Jensen Huang's maternal grandfather built a successful leather business. Their shops were located less than a kilometre apart, and over time, business relationships evolved into family ties. Those connections eventually became part of a broader network known in Taiwan as the Tainan Gang, a group of entrepreneurs whose influence extended across banking, manufacturing, construction, and technology. The family connection between Jensen Huang and Lisa Su traces back to Huang's maternal grandfather, Luo Chu, a successful merchant who had 12 children. His youngest daughter became Jensen Huang's mother. Meanwhile, Luo Chu's eldest son had a daughter who married into the Su family and later became Lisa Su's mother. That's why, according to Taiwan's traditional kinship system, Lisa Su would actually call Jensen Huang her uncle, even though he's only 6 years older than she is. And one more branch, Luo Chu's third daughter, Luo Suiliu, was said to be especially close to Jensen Huang's mother. Her youngest daughter married the eldest grandson of the Hou family, pillars of the Tainan Gang. Today, Jensen Huang and Lisa Su have helped put Taiwan at the center of the global AI boom. And while the industries have evolved over time, the entrepreneurial spirit that grew out of Tainan continues to thrive. In 2009, a 24-year-old Harvard graduate came back to Taiwan in the middle of the global financial crisis. He didn't have his sights on a tech startup or an investment bank, but a 50-year-old cement company. In the decades since, that company has exited China and expanded its businesses into robotics and advanced manufacturing. It's a journey that takes us from one of Taiwan's oldest industries to some of its newest opportunities. I'm Laurel Stewart. This is The Chainmaker. Joining me today is the president of Universal Cement, Jack Hou. Welcome to the show.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
I'd like to start where it all began. When you graduated from your master's in the US, a lot of your classmates were heading to Wall Street, getting jobs there, but you found yourself back in Taiwan at a cement company.
Yeah.
What's the story there?
Well, at that time, a lot of my classmates actually were having difficulty finding a job because, as you know, it was during the global financial crisis. So back then, the opportunity of coming back to Taiwan and work for Universal Cement actually came up randomly. I wasn't really expecting that. So it was during that time that my family took over the management of Universal Cement. And my parents, well, they asked me, say, hey, it's kind of difficult looking for a job right now. Would you want to come back to Taiwan and help us out for a little bit? And I said, sure. And I've been here ever since. So it was actually quite an unexpected journey.
Sounds like actually quite good timing in many ways.
Well, good or not, you can actually say that in hindsight. But at that moment, I guess that was just the option that I felt that I should take upon to help out my family.
And how did your education in the US prepare you for that?
It actually did not prepare me for manufacturing at all. I think for most of the people who receive their education in the US, during that time, you have your sights either set on finance, consulting, or tech, right? No one actually really focused on traditional manufacturing. I mean, even today, right, in the US, people are talking about, maybe some students should receive an education in a trade school or, in mechanical engineering, material science, et cetera. That actually translates into the manufacturing industry. But during that time when I was a student in the US, that was the last thing we actually, thought about.
So, I mean, you mentioned that it's your family's company,
Yeah.
and they invited you back to work there.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you about your family ties. Your great-grandfather, Hou Yuli,
Yes.
started as a cloth merchant
Right.
in Tainan.
Yeah.
He's part of what's known as the Tainan Gang.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, so in Chinese, I think quite a few people may have heard about the so-called Tainan Gang, but we started as in the very impoverished part of Tainan along the seashore in a village called Beimen. So back in the days, they were very poor. They were and they don't actually have much to do if they just stick around in where they're born. So, he gathered some of his relatives and also some of his friends from the village next door, from the village next to us, and then, they started in textile trading, clothing trading, and then gradually they move up the supply chain into textile manufacturing, and then we branch out to other industries such as cement and also food and beverage. But it was during that time, it was during the transition from the Japanese colonial period to the KMT rule, that coincidentally there were many Japanese-owned companies that retreated back to Japan. And it was during that time the KMT government, they were looking for business groups to take over these factories. And then gradually moving into more of an industry that focused on supplying basic goods for Taiwan's post-war development. So that was pretty much how the history of the Tainan Gang started. And I'm very glad that we're still moving along quite well at this moment.
Yeah. So would you say that the Tainan Gang still exists in some form today?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're still managing Universal Cement, and Tainan Spinning is still going strong. And of course, President, the 7-Eleven, the Starbucks in Taiwan, many people are very familiar with that. So even though, we have branched out quite a bit, it's quite logical because it's been 60, 70 years now. But, we still maintain a close relationship with one another, either in the form of shareholding and also personal relationship. So I would say we're still doing quite well.
On those ties, I know that you're also related by marriage to Jensen Huang and Lisa Su from NVIDIA and AMD. Have those ties helped you in any way in Universal Cement?
Well, I think we're in very different industries. And yeah, they're actually my mother's, Jensen Huang is actually my mother's first cousin. So they're actually quite close. And, I visited them when I was a kid. But today we're very, very different industry, and they're in the US and we're in Taiwan. And I think the business that we're in is completely different. So, I'm very proud that I can call them my relatives, but, we're doing our separate things. But of course, when they're on TV, when they have interviews, I listen to them and try to learn from, their success.
Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of these connections are foundational to Taiwan's business community, but also you personally as well.
I think networking in business is always very essential, right? And you try to find the ties that would help you in business and in your personal growth. So I think I value these developing of these networks very important to me.
Yeah, for sure. There's this concept, China plus one, which means companies keep operations in China, but then also add a production base in another location to reduce risks. But one of your first big moves was to remove the company completely from China. Why was that?
Well, when I first moved back to Taiwan and took over the management, and our family took over the management of Universal Cement, our biggest operation was actually in China. We had a cement factory there, and we had several concrete plants there as well. But when we came back and we reviewed our operations there, we just realized that we simply don't have the economy of scale to maintain success over there. And also, it was part of another problem was that we just couldn't, like I mentioned previously, networking is very, very important. But our relationship with the local governments there just simply isn't good enough. I mean, you cannot out-network the local companies, right? So just looking at where we were, we just came to the conclusion that it was best to focus our investments in other endeavors. So that's why we pull out.
So since your company exited from China, have you also seen other companies do the same thing?
I think 2010 is a very different world from 2026. And there were also, I mean, we can definitely see that if you don't have that scale, you don't have that cost advantage, it's very easy for you to slip in terms of competition. So yeah, of course, I think there are other examples that's currently taking place now. But again, like I said, back then in 2010, I think China isn't definitely as mature of a country as it is today. But I mean, if we look at examples in the automobile, how BYD, for example, is climbing up so fast, and it's very difficult for other companies to catch up.
So back in 2010, as you were exiting China, you were also building a new branch for an electronics business, which you then later in 2025 bought a US company, TechScan.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So our tech company, which is named Unio, is actually a company that was started by my brother. So my brother, after he graduated from MIT, he moved back to Taiwan, and he was working at ITRI, the Industrial Tech Research Institute in Hsinchu. And he was in charge of a thin film pressure sensor project. And in 2011, that was when we purchased the right to that technology and spun off that into a wholly owned company of Universal Cement. And TechScan, on the other hand, they're also a company founded by several MIT alum, and they have been a leading brand in the sensor industry for the past 40 years. So it just, last year, the opportunity came up that the private equity company that owns TechScan wants to exit. And it seems like a good deal for us, and we just decided to go ahead and purchase TechScan. I think one of the main reason for us purchasing TechScan was because they have a very strong sales network in the US and in Europe, which is for us previously in Taiwan that, of course, due to the time zone difference and the traveling, we weren't able to serve our customers in the US as well, as good as we wanted to. So with the acquisition of TechScan now, I think we have a better reach, and we're much more capable of serving our customers in areas outside of Asia.
So these two different industries, how do you find there's synergy between the two of them?
Well, I think if you want to talk about a very clear definition of synergy, I mean, these are very two different things. But of course, we are in traditional manufacturing, and we always want to see if we can make an inroad to the tech sector. And this is something that my brother invented, pretty much. So if you talk about strict synergy, I guess something that we have in common is that we are very focused on material science because cement is about formula blending different raw materials into manufacturing of cement and then concrete. And at the same time, with thin film pressure sensor, it's also very much focused on material science, which is a blending of conductive materials such as silver and carbon. And in these two instances, we've learned that one of our competitive edge is actually in material formulation. Like I mentioned, whether it's cementitious products, gypsums, or pressure sensing. And the know-how, the competitive edge that we have is in how to make these materials better.
Sounds like even though the end products are completely different, the core manufacturing concepts are similar. So there's...
Yeah, I think in this day and age, if you compare to several decades ago when my family, the elders are managing the company, back then you have a surplus in human labor, right? So many people are fighting for one specific job, and it's much easier to, I think it's much easier to branch out, but in today's time when there's a labor shortage and you aren't able, it becomes a question of how you train and how you retain your colleagues. And so one thing that we could do as business owner is to try to find common ground in what we're doing. So, it's much easier to manage. At least you have a very clear logic and very clear roadmap of what you are doing, what you're engaging in. So, even if these industries that we're currently engaged in, they may sound very different, but at the end of the day, it's material science. So even with my brother's colleagues, sometimes they could give us some input on how we could adjust our formulations and the different methods, the different materials that we can use. So I guess at the end of the day, today you try to find the common thread that can permeate in how you manage. So
I'm glad you brought that up because you've said before that you want Universal Cement to focus on quality, not quantity, for it to not become too sprawling.
Yeah.
And it sounds like a very difficult thing to do, but actually what you're saying is that actually you can find the common ground in everything that you do.
Yeah, I think we try to make sense of what we're trying to do. And so before we take on any new endeavors, I always ask myself, is this something that we can find synergy with what we're currently doing? Right? We don't want to take on a new opportunity and then at the end of the day, it cannibalizes what we're currently doing. So you just try to find the most efficient path out of everything. You need to make sure that this is definitely an add-on that can help your business, but not taking away the efficiency that's very important in managing anything today.
So I want to touch on Taiwan's labor force because there's a very low birth rate, aging population. This is a tech show, so I do need to ask about the factory floor. How is AI technology changing the way that you manufacture?
Well, I think it's definitely very helpful for us. And at this moment, we're still exploring how AI could help us in different ways. So just for example, in the past, in concrete, I know you probably see trucks that have a spinning barrel that's going through the cities. So that's a concrete truck. And the dispatching of those trucks usually would be the task of one of our colleagues, right? But it's very difficult for someone who's taking over that job to know how to dispatch trucks and how to organize how many trucks you need at
logistics.
The logistics. Like when we were asking them about their how they come up with that number, they just said, it's experience. So what we ended up doing is we try to build a software that takes into the granular account of the specifics of how to come up with that number of trucks. And you could call that AI, but that's just to manage to transfer his knowledge into workable data. So today, most of our truck dispatching is actually done by, you could call AI, but it's just many data points that can come up with a number that can, for anyone to refer to for the number of trucks we need to dispatch. And at the same time, there are other places that we could do that in our factory. For example, at the production line of our gypsum board, there are very minute details of quality inspections, like in terms of a couple of centimeters to measure the width of the board if it fits your standard. So in the past, there were actually people with rulers to measure it, but now we just replace it with cameras.
Right.
So
do those calculations.
And that could save us a few more headcounts on the production floor, or it has indeed become a very difficult problem for us to overcome because factory is in the rural areas of Taiwan. It's very difficult to find new recruits. So we're just trying to find things here and there, and
I was going to ask, finding new recruits, how you have maintained being competitive in the labor market.
Well, we try our best, of course. For some of our factories, the locations of our factories are, sometimes they're close to science parks, and of course, our compensation may not be as competitive as the positions that are offered in these science parks. But we do our best. So, like I mentioned, I think in today's environment, it's much more important about how you train your colleagues and make them feel like they have a sense of belonging, because they could very much well have like 3 or 5 openings at any time, and many other companies trying to recruit them. But we focus a lot more on the job training and teaching them, and then just make them feel like they have a sense of purpose working in this company. So every week I try to go to several factories of ours and get to talk to people at the job site, see how they're doing, etc. But we make sure we are training them, and sometimes we do have colleagues who went on to different companies, but they ended up coming back because they feel like it feels like home.
Knit.
They feel like home. There's an affinity that I think in today's day you focus a lot more on creating that bond between you and your colleague, and that's something I try to instill with my colleagues.
Yeah, it's really important. Finally, last question. This show's tagline is Taiwan makes, the world moves. Semiconductors get the headlines, but what would you say our audience should know about Taiwan's traditional industries?
Well, I think we are the foundation of what built Taiwan. And from the perspective of Universal Cement and the Tainan Gang, we have a legacy, and our legacy for more than 6 decades is, whether in cement or in textile or in food, we've been with Taiwan for all these times. And we might seem very pedestrian, but we are the foundation of what built Taiwan as it is today. And even for the tech sectors, they still need cement and concrete, right? So even though we may be old, or some people, as they would say in Taiwan, they call us 夕阳产业. But hey, we've survived for so long, right? And we're still doing well. So from my position, I always have the mentality of, this is the legacy that we need to carry on. And in order to have this history, that means, we have survived for all these years. And we're not going anywhere. So it's always my one of my top goals to make sure that we've been here for 60 years. Let's see if we can do it for another 60.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Jack Hou of Universal Cement, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Universal Cement's story shows how traditional industries can reinvent themselves, from a China exit to robotics. Taiwan's future isn't built on chips alone. Let's take a break now and watch the Supply Chain Index. Now let's take a look at tech biz. First up, humanoid robotics is entering a new phase of commercialization. Companies like Unitree and Agility Robotics are raising billions to scale production, while Tesla is already using humanoid robots on its factory floors. It's a shift from prototypes to real-world application. Next, New York has become the first US state to temporarily pause new large-scale AI data center projects. The move reflects growing concerns over massive power and water consumption, rising electricity costs, and the potential impact of AI on jobs. Finally, the European Union has ordered Google to share anonymized search data with competing search engines and open Android to rival AI assistants starting in 2027. Regulators say the measures are designed to boost competition and curb Google's market dominance. That's all for today's Tech Biz. From textiles and cement to semiconductors and AI, the industries may be different, but the spirit remains the same: adapting to change and creating opportunities for the next generation. And in many ways, this story helps explain not only Taiwan's past, but also its growing role in the future of AI. Thank you for watching the show today. I'm Laurel Stewart. See you next time.